Let's keep it rolling with our playoff previews in the Fiesta Bowl between Michigan and TCU. And let's start talking about those Horned Frogs with our friend Brandon Marcello. Brandon, TCU coming off its first loss of the season in the Big 12 championship game. Obviously, a lot of time between that game and the semifinal. But how do you think Sonny Dykes' squad will respond?
I think they're going to be as hungry as ever and also as healthy as ever. They've been banged up for most of the last half of the season. Max Duggan, even the quarterback who just laid it out on the field there in the Big 12 championship game, it was amazing. He's been hobbled a little bit. Quentin Johnson, their top-tier receiver, has been hobbled at times. Kendre Miller, hobbled at times. And they're going to be motivated after losing that game. I'm really interested to see a supercharged TCU team in the Fiesta Bowl when they regroup.
It seems like an angry TCU team, and 6 of their games this season were actually decided by one score. They've played in a lot of tight contests in 2 overtimes. Is there an advantage for them having experience in so many of these close games?
Well, certainly. They've got 7 comeback victories in the second half this season. That's been the storyline for them, and everybody questioning whether they're a for-real team. And I think they proved themselves through the year they are, and that's why they're deserving of a playoff spot. But how does that wear on a team? I don't think it wore on them at all. I mean, they played so many games in a row and kept coming back. Now they've got some time to rest. So maybe they've learned from that, and maybe they'll actually, jump on a team early for once instead of trying to play the comeback in the second half.
I'm sure their fans would love that for sure. As for Michigan, they remained perfect on the year, and for the second straight season, Wolverines find themselves in the playoff. Did not go so well for them last year, though. But what makes this year's squad so different?
Well, they've learned from the past first. And then secondly, I think they're a little bit more balanced defensively. I think they're better defensively than they were last season. And if it's possible, I think they're much more physical in the trenches, particularly along that offensive line. The Joe Moore Award winners for the last 2 years, first time ever, with the best offensive line in college football, they absolutely demolish opponents in the Big Ten. And here's the thing. People criticize them for, that game was close. They were tied with Rutgers at halftime. Well, Michigan's offensive line allows them to dictate the tempo and do exactly what they want to do against teams. In a lot of ways, they're like the lion, and they go around just toying with their food and their victims. They are going to demolish and eat you alive no matter what, and it's because of that offensive line. They can play slow. They can go up tempo. They can attack you down the field. Look no further than the Ohio State game when they scored 4 explosive touchdowns of more than 50 yards or more. We're not used to seeing that from Michigan's offense, but they can do whatever they want because they wear down opponents in the second half with the tremendous offensive line. And I would dare say maybe the best offensive line we've seen in college football in the last 4 years.
Whoa, okay, so I was just going to say the nation's best offensive line, but maybe the best offensive line of all time. Mix that with the resurgence of Donovan Edwards means no Blake Corum, no problem. So how does and can TCU stop this run game?
I don't know if they can. TCU by far has the worst rush defense in the playoff right now. And not just that, they're in the bottom half nationally in many rushing categories. They've given up 21 rushing touchdowns this season. And Donovan Edwards is feeling it right now. They know he's the man. Blake Corum's out. He's rushed for more than 185 yards in the last 2 games. He leads the FBS at over 7 yards per carry. He could be in store for a huge game. And I can bet you that Michigan offensive line is going to be licking its chops. Because as much as I talk about TCU being healthy, imagine being an offensive lineman after going through the trenches in warfare for the last year and the last weeks. And then you get to go take some time off, then go to the playoff and be fresh and hungry and play for a national championship. I would not want to be TCU's defensive front in this game.
All right, before the game, McCarthy's longest pass completion of the season was just 43 yards, which is still good, but he threw 3 touchdowns of at least 45 yards against Ohio State. Now, because it isn't something that we've seen from this offense as consistently as we've seen that strong run game, are those big passing plays replicable in the semi?
Yeah, I think so. And against TCU's defense, however, there will be some issues going against that secondary, which is very good and might be the best in this playoff field. But again, if you're not getting pressure on JJ McCarthy, he's going to be able to sit back there and pick and choose how to go about attacking your defense, which is going to, at some point, open things up down the field like it did against Ohio State, particularly in the second half of the game. So I think TCU is going to have to mix some things up, probably bring in some exotic blitzes to not necessarily confuse that offensive line, but find a way to create pressure that out leverages Michigan instead of trying to go one-on-one with them in the trenches.
As for the quarterback on the other side, Max Duggan, this will be potentially his last college football game. We know the stats on the field and everything he's done for this team, but how much is he just the heartbeat of this squad?
It's absolutely incredible. Just to think that he did not win the quarterback battle going into this season is outrageous to me. Comes in, comes off the bench, and has just been absolutely stellar. Deserved to be in New York City for the Heisman Trophy ceremony. And outside of Caleb Williams on championship week in the Pac-12 championship game, Max Duggan had one of the more heroic and memorable performances, even if it wasn't a loss, in that Big 12 championship game. And the amount of heart you cannot question. He's got amazing talent, and he's got great pieces around him. I think, though, they need to do some things to kind of get him moving a little bit more out of the pocket and creating. I know that sounds crazy, but I really like him when he's on his feet, moving around and being able to create some plays. Just as we saw in the Big 12 championship game, boy, he can carry that team on his back when they need so. I mean, remember, he put up, I think, 95 yards or 90 yards on an 80-yard touchdown drive to tie the game. How did he get more yards than that? Because there was penalties. The team was actually hurting themselves, and he was making up for it. Just incredible play.
Yeah, his running was ridiculous. And then when he would walk back to the line of scrimmage, he was limping. So hopefully he's feeling a little bit better getting ready for this game. Okay, these are two second half teams. Not a lot of people give Michigan nearly as much credit for it, but how much does that play a role in the outcome of this game?
It's just fascinating. Both teams with 7 comeback victories this season, both teams second half programs. Michigan is outscoring opponents by 15.9 points per game in the second half this season. That's the best mark in the FBS in the last 5 years. So as much as we talk about TCU and their amazing second half performances, Michigan's even better and by far the best in college football. Which team comes out on fire? Which team comes out and just punches the other in the mouth? I think that's the team that's going to end up winning because we know what both of them can do in the second half. I want to see who can come out and put it all together in those first and second quarters. That's going to be the key.
Set the tone early, but it ain't over till it's over. Let's end here. Who's playing for a national championship, Brandon?
I think it's Michigan. Just way too many weapons. And again, much better in the trenches, both defensively and offensively. That offensive line has what it takes to beat any opponent in this playoff. And right now, going into this 4-team field, Michigan is my pick to win the national championship.
Okay, I was going to ask you who Michigan is going to face in the national championship. Who are they beating then? Who's your pick for the other game?
They're going to be beating Georgia in a rematch from last year's semifinal where Georgia beat them up. And I think, as we talked about this earlier in the season, about Ohio State and what they learned from their grueling loss to Michigan last year, where Michigan pushed them around. Well, Ohio State said they learned everything, but they didn't. They got pushed around again in the second half of that game. I think Michigan is the team that has learned a lot from last season, that loss against Georgia. I think Georgia has taken maybe a half step back from where they were offensively last season as far as trying to be an explosive team. And that plays well in the way Michigan is structured defensively. And again, Michigan's offensive line is going to be able to push over any defensive line or defensive front they face in this playoff. I have Michigan winning the national championship and lifting Jim Harbaugh high above the college football world, and us wondering, wow, just a year and a half, 2 years ago, we were wondering if he's going to get fired. And here he is now doing something that no one's done in the playoff era or BCS era at Michigan.
Or coaching in the NFL. Yeah, what a wild ride to get to this point. Brandon, thank you so much. Let's send it over to Grace.
Thanks, Emily. Both Michigan and TCU looking for their first ever college football playoff wins. Let's take a deeper dive into this matchup as we welcome in our team site experts, Sam Webb and Jeremy Clark. Guys, let's start with Michigan's offense. Blake Corum is out with an MCL injury, but we know the Wolverines can win without him. Through the air with JJ McCarthy or on the ground with Donovan Edwards. So, Sam, what's this matchup look like against a TCU defense that really tightened up down the stretch?
They certainly did, and I think that what Michigan discovered toward the end of the season with JJ is that he can carry the team. That if the running game is limited, like it was against Ohio State, mostly due to the injury, because there were plays on the field they just weren't realizing with Blake Corum out and Donovan Edwards clearly battling that hand injury. But JJ McCarthy stepped up, made some huge plays through the air. And don't discount his ability to run the football. That was a big factor in that game and helping open up the run game too. But this is a contest where, while I think they'll take their shots, I think they have more faith in JJ's ability to hit balls down the football field, I think it'll look more like what we've seen Michigan be typically this season, and that is really pounding the rock. I think they look at this TCU defense and feel like they're going to be able to run it at them whether the box is loaded or not. I know people will point to Texas, but Texas's rushing attack, Bijan Robinson's a great player, but it's not the same. It's not the same as Michigan's offensive line. It's not the same as Michigan's run scheme. And if you looked at Kansas State's ability to run the football, I think Michigan will look at the lack of edge on that defense and really feel like they can exploit TCU by hitting them on the edge of their defense.
Yeah, when you look at TCU's offense, you're looking at big-time playmakers. You're looking at Max Duggan. You're looking at a Heisman finalist at quarterback. You're looking at one of the nation's top running backs in Kendre Miller, averaged over 6 yards a carry. Quentin Johnson is a big play receiver. So you've got some guys there that have big playmaking ability. TCU led the nation in big plays, over 50 yards. This defense they're going to be facing against Michigan is going to be a very big challenge. Like Sam said, they're big up front. They're big in the trenches. They got athletes in the secondary. But what I like about TCU's chances here on offense is they've been battle tested. They've gone against athletes like they have at Texas. Kansas State is a team that doesn't make mistakes. They don't have the 3, 4, 5-star talent that Michigan has, but they do have some great athletes. And TCU was able to make some big plays against Kansas State. And quite frankly, they were able to make big plays all season long on offense. If Max Duggan can continue to throw the ball deep like he has successfully to Quentin Johnson, get that run game going against Kendre Miller. Hey, this was a team that years ago when they played in the Rose Bowl, everyone was saying Wisconsin's going to roll over them because the size was different. But TCU has a lot of speed, and I think that speed's going to be something that Michigan, other than Ohio State, they really haven't seen this year.
Yeah, Jeremy, you hit on it. TCU really breaks the stereotype of one of those Big 12 passing teams. Really well balanced with a run-first approach on that air raid offense. They got the speed. But can you tell us about TCU's defense? Because I feel like it's a little bit underrated.
Yeah, the defense is a little bit underrated. They played really well down the stretch, playing against Texas Tech, playing against Texas. Sam mentioned that game they had against Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson is the best running back in college football. They held him to 28 yards in that game. Bijan Johnson he runs for 28 yards in one carry most of the time. But the fact that they fly around the ball, they've got great linebackers in D. Winters and Jamoy Hodge. Johnny Hodges was the Big 12 newcomer of the year at linebacker. But that secondary is something that I'm going to be watching. Trey Hodges Tomlinson just won the Jim Thorpe Award. The other corner on the other side may be just as good in Josh Newton. So watching those two guys eliminating those big plays that Michigan can create, especially with McCarthy, again, I feel like TCU's been battle tested in some of the athletes they faced, playing against competition in the Big 12, playing against quarterbacks that can run the football when the pocket breaks down. So I really feel that for TCU's defense, this might be the fastest defense Michigan has seen all year. No disrespect to Ohio State, but if you look from top to bottom, from the defensive line all the way back to the secondary, TCU is extremely fast on defense, and that's something to keep an eye on this game.
Yeah. Well, piggybacking off what Jeremy said, I definitely think TCU will be a more sound defense than Ohio State's. I think their secondary will definitely be better than Ohio State's. So that might make it more of a challenge throwing the football. But again, I think for Michigan offensively, this is going to be a game about pounding the rock. We'll see. But Michigan defensively, look, I've watched TCU's offense a good bit, followed them through the season. I agree. They are tested. I think they're for real. I think Max Duggan is for real. I think Quentin Johnson is an outstanding player, probably a first-round draft pick. For Michigan, it's going to be about limiting explosives. And that was the name of the game against Ohio State. If you watch that game, how often did you see C.J. Stroud drop back and he's in the pocket looking for a guy, trying to find A, his first read, B, a downfield shot. Michigan kept everything in front, and they did a good job of taking Marvin Harrison out of the game. I think the recipe will be much of the same. much the same against TCU. Keeping everything in front. Michigan does a good job of limiting explosives and not letting Quentin Johnson beat them. Whether that's cloud coverage to his side, doing things to make sure that if they get beat, which is possible, that Max Duggan finds other guys to try to exploit the Michigan defense. And then, can Max Duggan make some big plays? I actually think Michigan's going to have a tougher time defending Max Duggan than they did C.J. Stroud. I think from a mental toughness standpoint, I think Max Duggan is one of the most mentally tough quarterbacks in the country, and that's going to make him more of a challenge for Michigan in this game. But again, a really tested defense, a really sound defense, and a defense that should get its best player back in Mike Morris for this game.
Well, guys, kind of an interesting stat here is both teams have 7 comeback wins this weekend, which is actually tied for most in the FBS. So it's going to be hard to count anyone out once the ball is kicked off. But Sam, what's the X factor here?
JJ McCarthy, without hesitation. He's the difference for Michigan this year. You looked at them last year heading into the playoff, and you were confident that they could compete. They got in that game against Georgia, which had a generational defense, right? And you face that team again, you probably lose again, even with J.J. McCarthy. He has 6 first-round picks or something ridiculous like that, right? But it's a closer game with J.J. McCarthy at least, because J.J. has the ability of balancing the equation. Most teams load the box against Michigan. It goes without saying, try to stop their run. It doesn't matter against most squads. They can run in the loaded boxes at will until they face a team like Georgia that's man enough to really stop them with the loaded box. And Michigan didn't. Michigan had no way of balancing that equation. They couldn't RPO them the way that Georgia RPO'd the Michigan defense. J.J. McCarthy allows you to do that. He can run the football. He's good in the RPO game. Now he's shown you he can hit downfield shots. He is a leader. Even though he's only a sophomore, he has shown the ability. Michigan was without 2 captains from the beginning of the season. They didn't miss him at all. You got to have a quarterback that's a leader. To do that, J.J. McCarthy is that X factor for Michigan.
For TCU, I'm going to say it's rest. TCU did not have a bye week since September 17th, and yet they played one of the most grueling schedules in all of college football. They were able to win 12 games. That rest will allow them to get some of their players back. Johnny Hodges, who I mentioned earlier, was the Big 12 defensive newcomer of the year. He didn't play against Kansas State. That was a huge loss for the Frogs on defense. But kind of piggybacking off Sam's comment with J.J. McCarthy, I'm going to go another X factor for TCU is Max Duggan. Can Max Duggan continue to play well? If Michigan does decide to load the box and forces Max to beat them through the air, can he continue to make all those throws? This is a guy that was doing everything he possibly could in that Big 12 championship game against Kansas State, so much so where he had to be carried off the field. Will he have enough energy to do that against a very athletic, very big, and very strong Michigan team? That's going to be something we're all going to be watching. And, hey, we all watch the Heisman Trophy. There's a lot of people, especially down in Fort Worth, that felt like maybe Max should have won that Heisman. This is going to be a great chance for him to go out there and prove everyone that doubted him wrong, just to go out there and play well for TCU and hopefully get a win.
Well, you know what, Jeremy? I agree with your first X factor. I think rest could be an X factor for all of us this time of year. Speaking of, hope you guys get a break. I know you're working hard out there. Appreciate you joining us. And for more coverage on this game, check out thehornfrogblitz.com and the Michigan Insider.